Hey y'all, it has been forever and a half since I last recorded a voiceover for a long format video, but I wanted to do it for this video because this drawing is a little bit special to me. And that's because this is the cover for my first ever romance novel. I've made comics before, I've made them for many years, but I recently started dabbling in prose, and I wrote a monster of a book. And I wanted to talk you through some of my process since it was a trial. As you can see from all these, I started out with a lot of different sketches, just ideating, trying to figure out the composition for the cover. And this is difficult both because it is a cover design which wraps around but also needs to function as just the front cover, both for when the book is closed and also for ebooks. And then also because the romance in this book, there's 3 characters, it's a polyamorous romance, and that's surprisingly difficult to compose. So you see a ton of me trying out to figure out how to communicate this in my drawing. Ultimately, I do scrap it just because I don't like the way it turns out. But I tried a lot of things, and honestly I might return to some of these sketches for images that are not the cover, maybe for like promo art, because I do still like some of them, they just didn't feel right for the cover. But here you can see me going in and starting the sketch that will become the actual cover, although I do play around again with a couple versions of it that I don't end up going with. But this is what I end up using as the basis for the cover design. Now this is a drawing of Phaon, who's one of the main 3 characters. He is a dragon who can take human form, and also there are some gender shenanigans that go on with Phaon, which is super fun. So after I lay in my roughest sketch, I start going in with another layer of sketching, trying to lay in more structure and have it be more solid and feel more like figured out. This does not go super well the first time. I actually end up redoing the basic structure of this drawing a few times in a few different places, but for just getting in my general idea for like the lighting and stuff, like this worked really well, and I really liked the kind of like moody, dark feeling of it. Since I didn't like the compositions that had all 3 main characters in it, I wanted to make sure that people got the correct vibe, which is kind of dark and obviously something with a fantasy twist, but still like horny. Because, you know, it's a romance novel and I have to communicate that somehow. Now, when I go in and ink things, I honestly don't really think about it as inking anymore. I just think of it as a layer of refinement in my sketch. But I ended up not really liking much of the stuff I was doing, so you can see me going through and doing a bunch of studies, both based on life drawing and also on some anatomy texts. And my top favorite books for this, for reference, are the Morpho Anatomy books. They break down the form so well in a way that is so... It communicates the form and the anatomy so well in a way that I've never seen another text do. But like I was saying, I don't really think of inking as inking, I just think of it as another layer of refinement in my sketch, so I'm not super worried about being super clean. You can see there's still sketchy marks on the hand and places like that. I think those marks bring life to a piece, and if I don't like them later, I can always paint them out. Now this is a deceptively simple drawing, but I used so much reference for it. I used a reference from a 3D model off of Sketchfab for the face, just because the angle was difficult for me. I used a bunch of just searching for short curly hair on Google, a bunch of references of curly hair to make sure I got the structure right for the short hair and for the angle. And of course, I used a ton of references for the body and the hand and arm and everything, which you'll see I redraw this countless times. Like, you'll think that I'm done when I finish this like ink sketch phase. I'm not done. I was so unhappy with the way I drew the body here in the beginning. And so I redid it countless times, and it was a pain in the ass and like super annoying to do, but it was worth it. And because this is the cover and not just like a one-off image that like after I finish it I could just be like, oh, that was a learning experience and move on from there. But this is the cover for the book, so I was really I really wanted it to be something that wouldn't pain me to look at it for the rest of time, or for the rest of whenever I have it in use. So laying out color, you know from my sketch that I'm gonna have a very dark background, like almost black, but I wanted to start with this bright orange because having this underneath instead of the black will just lend so much life and radiance to the colors as I'm painting them. And I can always go in and darken things as needed, but painting in that luminance again, if I don't start with it, will be a lot harder. And this piece, because it's so deceptively simple looking and just so straight on, it lives and dies by the color and the lighting and kind of that feeling of life that is inherent to the colors I'm picking. As with most of my images for Spitfire, I went with a very warm color palette that's mostly red, orange, and yellow, because this is a book about a dragon romance, a dragon shifter romance, and the main dragon is a gold dragon. So, you know me. Plus, I just love those warm colors, especially anything that can be described as a sunset color. So, red, orange, yellow, magenta, and purple are just like my absolute favorites. Now here you can see me going in and painting over the face. I both like redid the nose and softened it up, and then went over the brows and stuff. And this is really important for me, because sometimes, like, even if your sketch is technically correct, sometimes it's too harsh and you have to go in and soften up the things that should feel soft. And noses are like my least favorite things to draw in the world, partially because of this, because in a lot of circumstances, especially from this low angle, if you're too harsh with the nose, it looks really bad really quickly. And noses are really hard for me to draw. I don't know why. It's one of those sticking points for me that I almost never get right, or I feel like I don't ever get it right. So softening it up really helped, especially with having all the gems in the face, where that feeling of protrusion and dimension was really important, and I didn't want the nose to overshadow those other forms. I spent a lot of time in this piece drawing the little gems that pepper over Phaon's skin, and I used reference for this also, but it was less direct than a lot of the other reference, because it's just, the rocks I needed were kind of like the insides of geodes or like rock, like gemstone clusters, and the way those are arranged don't really conform to the underlying structure that I needed. So it was about kind of looking at shapes and general structure and ideas and the way the light kind of bounced, but not being too close to the reference. Now at this point I switch out my underlying book template, which was a bad decision. I should have stuck with the original one. So this, I have to futz with the dimensions later. It's fine. It's not a big deal. But I went from the original KDP layout to one from Lulu. Both of them had like the wrong page count because I didn't know the page count while I was working on this. But there's a reason I didn't do like a wrap illustration, like a proper wrap with lots of details on the full wrap. The biggest reason was I didn't want to draw that because it's so much work. But the other reason is because I didn't know how big my cover was going to be yet, and I wanted to get the art done before the book was done being formatted. Right here you can see I'm spending a lot of time cleaning up the hair and painting over it on top of my lines and everything. I do this fun thing where every time I draw hair, especially curls, whenever I'm doing my underpainting, I'm like, oh, this looks so dull and lifeless and like it doesn't look good. Oh, I need to start it all over again. And then I have to remind myself to trust the process because I do lots of dimensional, like multi-layer shading and highlighting on curls, and that's what gives it sort of that feeling of volume and glossy, moisturized goodness. And so then eventually when I do get to the overpainting time and I am able to add those extra pops of highlight and shadow, then it starts to look good and not, totally dead and lifeless. And this happens every time. This happens with a lot of aspects of my art, but especially hair. So if you're having a piece that you're working on and you're working on like the underpainting part of it, and you think it looks a little dull or lifeless, maybe you do need to scrap it, I don't know, but maybe you just need to push through to get to the like fun little accents. And it really does help if you leave those for later in your process. You don't want to get too precious with the details too early on, because then it's hard to change things if you make mistakes, and then you end up molding the piece to those mistakes that are like baked in, but you don't want to change them or get rid of them because it took so long to do it. So after the hair, I get to work on this sort of gem encrusted hand, which is actually inspired by a super gorgeous look by this makeup artist on Instagram, Ella Frank Simpkins. I absolutely love like everything this person makes, so gorgeous. I think I ended up not liking what I did the first time. It felt too structured and organized. I wanted it to feel more organic. But having a reference like this, something to go off of, is just invaluable for texture, for conforming to the form. And I did find there was a slight trick to communicating this texture that I wanted, which was to paint in some actual gems, but then do sort of individualized little sparkles that matched the form that I wanted to convey, and then turn some of those sparkles into tiny gems, but let some of them just live as sparkles without any extra dimension. And that seemed to really pull off what I wanted to do and emphasize like the shape and texture. Because one of the things that was really important to me with this image was conveying this idea that I have in the text in Spitfire, where when Phaon takes a human form, sometimes they will have like scales on their skin or gemstones or other things, and it's just sort of this idea of like scales and gems sort of being married visually, because I think that just like looks so cool. And all Spitfire is like all the things that I love that are super self-indulgent all mashed together. So like there's a royal romance, there's a dragon shifter romance, there's blood magic, there's a soul bond, the polyamory, because love triangles are exhausting. There's sword lesbians. Every character is queer unless stated otherwise. It's just everything I want to do. So here, once again, you can see I was unhappy with the body. I went away and I spent a whole day doing studies, and then I took some of my favorite, like most applicable studies and pulled them in so I could redo the body. And I just didn't even bother like inking this at all. You can see it's like a much softer texture than the face and hand. It doesn't really matter. And so apart from just painting this, I also have to make it mesh with the style. And don't worry, I painted over the hand here, but it's on a separate layer, so I can just erase it later, and I do end up doing that. And a lot of this now is just me futzing with form, looking at a ton of references, trying to figure out what communicates what I need, because I've worked really hard to up my anatomy game over the past few years, but I still have a strong preference for drawing AFAB bodies, and AMAB is just not my strong suit. Like, I don't know how y'all's tits work. They don't make sense to me. I'm trying my best, but it don't make sense. So I applied the bond tattoo that Phaon has, and I started working in more gemstones to different parts of the body to match with the hand and the earrings and the face and everything. And then here's like the really tedious part of me just drawing more gemstones. This took so much time, and in the end I didn't actually end up using most of this because it drew too much attention away from the central focus of the piece. So woe is me, I wasted a bunch of time doing this. But I mean, even though I wasted the time, it's never wasted because it was a learning experience, and maybe I'll draw something in the future that needs exactly these gemstones and I can just steal them from this piece and repurpose them, and then they'll see the light of day. But that's probably not gonna happen, so instead they just get life in this video, and you guys can see them and see all of my suffering. I think the funniest thing about this is that part of why I chose to draw gemstones in this, other than that they just look fucking cool, is I hate painting scales with like a burning passion, and so I was like, I know what'll be easier and more fun. Gemstones. And it was not easier, but I do think it was more fun, because scales are the worst, and I hate them. I have a vendetta against painting them, because they're so tedious, and like they're so uniform but organic at the same time. It is just like a goddamn nightmare. And so here you can see me immediately undo like 70% of my hard work and just fucking Thanos snap a bunch of those gemstones out of existence, both for clarity of form and to pull the focal point back up where it belonged. And also you can see me shade the bond mark over the titties. Because with changing the torso, not only did I have to like redraw the torso itself, I also had to reshape the bond mark to match the contours, and I also had to redraw the blood. So like you can see, it takes me doing drippy stuff like this, like blood, it's a lot of trial and error. I look at reference and stuff, but honestly, the way blood actually behaves in real life is like way less visually compelling. So I always make it like a bit thicker and like gooier, because it communicates that oozing feeling that is so like satisfying with blood. So there's really, reference is invaluable for a lot of things, but a lot of times it can be limiting, because if you are trying too hard to match something in the real world without putting like the oomph and the way it feels or the way it makes you feel, it really limits you. And so now that I have most of the painting done, I go ahead and I knock in that dark background, and I do this using some watercolor brushes, so they're naturally set to multiply. So I use that to get in a nice sort of gradiated, inconsistent, more natural feeling wash with some texture and some dimension to it. And then in addition, I make some other multiply layers to apply shadows to the form. I apply the shadow all over, again using like a textured brush, and then I mask it out everywhere and I mask it back in. And I find this works really well for me when I want to do big areas of shadow like this, because it prevents me from taking too much time on the shadow itself, and it really helps lock in a nice texture. So here I'm just going in and adding like my final touches. This includes deepening some shadows, bringing out some more lighting with effect layers like add, color dodge, and overlay. Using some sparkly brushes over the gems to give more depth. I also add some more little highlights. I add Fayon's freckles, which I like to use splatter brushes on like 50% opacity on multiply for like sort of the under like general texture of freckles, and then I go in with a normal brush and I add individual freckles to stand out on top of this. I add some more last like highlights and shadows with the blood to make it stand out more, and just futz with the end and add, you know, those little magenta accents and some little green ones that don't stand out a whole bunch, but they do their job. And then I went into Photoshop and I laid in the text and layout for the actual book layout, which you can see here. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I don't do voiceovers very often. And also, please check out Spitfire. I just put up on Amazon as an ebook and a print book.